The spraying of chemicals in the sky, it's a real thing. It's actually happening. And this is eugenics, folks. This is the total control of the human race by control of the atmosphere, via control of the food, by literally controlling the entire environment. Now, folks, I've been coming on to these shows for a long time, and I've been speaking to you calmly. I've tried to speak to you rationally. I've tried to speak eloquently. I've tried to present information to the everyday person in a way that they can understand. I've attempted to offer understandings to the listener, looking at things from an energetic perspective, in order to hopefully help people who do listen to the show to be able to remove fear from their lives, to be able to see how easy it is to actually come into their power. But I haven't done this simply because I believe people should sit passively and sit idly and wait for change to happen. When I talk about the way to change your reality is by changing your energetic state inside, what I'm talking about is the removal of fear, because removing fear, changing the energetic state inside, gives you the ability to address that which exists in the physical world around you. There are too many people who listen to talk about to change your outer world, you have to change your inner world, and they believe that that's all they have to do. They believe they have to put themselves in this energetic state of love and just sit there. But they don't realize that you also have to act. You've got to change yourself to this energetic state of love within and remove the fear within in order to be able to act within the physical. But if you don't act within the physical, then you're simply out of balance. You're not yin and yang. You're not addressing the balance that's required between the spiritual and the physical. This balance must be acquired. You can't simply sit in a spiritual state of love without acting in the physical to effect positive change. One necessarily goes hand in hand with the other. And this is balance. And it's easy to see that this is what balance is, because until you obtain the correct energetic state within, then it's virtually impossible to address the outer world. It's virtually impossible to stand up to the corruption that exists in the world. But once you achieve the correct balance, you are able to do this, and it's also obvious to see the necessity in you doing this, because we all live in a physical world. This is a 3D reality, folks. No matter how spiritual you are, this is a 3D reality. And if you really think you're that spiritual and you don't need to address what goes on in the physical, try not going to the bathroom for a month and see how you feel then. I'm sure you'll realize that this is actually a physical reality, and that there are certain aspects of it that need to be addressed. And so that's the thing, folks. I've been coming onto the shows for a long time, and what I'm urging people to do is to act, to understand the power that you have, understand that the people around you in your community are just like you. They face the same threats, the same dangers as you. And it's time to let people know what's going on. If you haven't already been doing so, it's time to do it, because what we're facing with the removal of vitamins and nutrients from our shelves and the spraying of the population is a very, very serious problem. And the time for simply talking about it is over. If people can't understand what's happening in the sky, if they seriously think what's being sprayed in the sky are simply contrails, as I said, explain to them how a contrail is formed. It's simply ice particles. It's a reaction between the heat of the aircraft exhaust and the super cold air. It can only happen at high altitudes where the air is very cold. It causes the air to condensate because of the heat from the jet engine. The condensation then freezes in the cold atmosphere after the plane has passed. But because ice particles are naturally heavier than air, they soon fall into the warmer atmosphere, and thus they melt and evaporate, and the contrail disappears within 30 to 45 seconds of the passing of the plane. This is because a contrail is a condensation trail, and that's how it works, folks. Anything that lasts longer than 30 to 45 seconds is simply not a contrail, because it's impossible. And it's also impossible for them to be formed in warm air. They are only ever formed at very high altitudes in very cold air. Jet trails that spread out across the sky and go from horizon to horizon and spread out into a cloudy haze are not contrails. And quite frankly, it's scientifically impossible for them to be contrails, simply because of the nature of condensation. Now I like to come onto these shows and I like to talk about energy. I like to keep things positive, and I really do attempt to present uplifting information to you all. But sometimes there's just things going on that need addressing, and hence the nature of the show today. As much as I do attempt to keep things positive, as much as I always wish to look at things from a positive perspective, and as much as I talk about the need to view information just as information and not attach emotion to it, as I've also said on numerous other occasions, by presenting information like this, something that I do not wish to do is promote an attitude of inaction in people. And I've presented the information that I have to you today, and I've dedicated most of the show to talking about chemtrails and GM food, because I really do believe that humanity is facing a clear and present danger, and there is a great need for the human race to get off its knees and to begin to act to address the problems that we face. We are indeed presented with a huge challenge in doing so, but it also is an opportunity that is too good to pass up. I recommend that everybody get out as much information as you can about chemtrails to everybody, and I recommend that you all write to your senators, write to your politicians, write to your mayors, write to your local members. They won't do anything, but write to them anyway. It would be wonderful if each of them received millions of pieces of correspondence, each addressing the same topic, and each demanding an investigation and also an immediate stop to all aerial spraying. I would also suggest expressing to these politicians that should they fail to act on this issue, we the people do intend to hold them complicit in what is potentially the biggest crime that has ever been perpetrated against humanity as a whole, once this issue is exposed, and it will be exposed. I think it is a very, very important thing, and I think it is something that unifies the entire human race. It is a common threat that we are all facing. As usual, the threat comes from our governments, as do most of the threats that we have faced as a civilization and a society ever since the advent of civilization and societies. It's really been one manufactured threat after another, hasn't it, folks? But they've got us to a stage now, and with what they are now implementing with the food, the confiscation of raw food, the confiscation of vitamins, the aerial spraying, you can see a really big picture of what's happening here, folks. And it affects me, it affects you, it affects every single person on the planet. And if the people of the world don't start making some noise about this, then you're basically condemning your children and your grandchildren to a loss of freedom and nutrition and education and virtually a removal from them of everything that makes humanity what it is. We have the power to stop this right now. It's in our hands right now. And should we fail to embrace this opportunity, and should we fail to act and to fix this problem, then it may well be the largest collective failure and the biggest act of collective irresponsibility that ever occurred in the history of the world. It really is that serious, folks. And if you're a person out there listening to this and you don't believe in chemtrails, if you seriously think that these big lines across the sky are simply jet trails, then all I'm asking you to do is to look at the evidence. Go and look up how contrails are formed. Go and ask a pilot how they're formed. I got my information from my father, who was a senior operations commander at an airport here in Australia. He told me all about how contrails were formed when I was a child, because it was so rare to see one. And when we would see them, I'd get quite excited, and he would tell me how they were formed. And he told me quite often about contrails. Told me about the nature of clouds, about different atmospheric conditions, because that's what he did. That's what my father was. And so I had a vague interest in all of this stuff simply because that's what my dad did. So all I'm asking is for you to go and research the formation of contrails, and go and research chemtrails. Go and look at some soil samples and water samples that have been collected from places around the world that show exorbitantly high amounts of aluminium, and ask yourself where this aluminium is coming from. Understand that aluminium causes things such as Alzheimer's disease. It inhibits brain function. It lowers cognitive function. It's very, very damaging. Aluminium is a very, very toxic metal. And it is not natural to the earth. It's not a naturally occurring metal. It's quite a complicated process to make the stuff. We didn't have the technology to extract alum from the earth and turn it into aluminium until quite recently, because it is quite a complicated process. So just go and look at this stuff, because this is a serious issue. It's really time for the people of the world to act. It's really time for the people of the world to understand that the governments do not have our best interests at heart, and it's time for the people to act. We need to stand up collectively and address this situation. We need to do it non-violently. We need to step away from the system, start helping each other. When we see families getting arrested by criminal organisations such as the FDA because of some trumped-up legislation some sociopath has written on a piece of paper somewhere, we need to stand up and address this, folks. Screw the FDA. They're a criminal organisation. Any organisation that's going to prevent people from growing wholesome food, any organisation that is going to promote the use of fungicides and pesticides and foods that are created by criminal organisations such as Monsanto. I mean, the crap that the FDA passes off as food, I wouldn't feed half of it to a rat. The FDA is not about providing healthy food. It's about removing healthy food. And the politicians that support these things and enact these pieces of legislation are either corrupt sociopaths, or they're being puppeteered by someone who's got some dirt on them or something, because none of their actions are sane. But the thing is that the people have to stop going along with it. We all have to stand up and say, no, we're not going to put up with this. When we see companies such as the FDA confiscating cheese from someone, we need to stand up for it. When we see places like Rawsome Food getting raided by police with guns drawn in an act of virtual terrorism against raw food, we need to stand up and address this, because this is even worse than what the Gestapo were doing in World War II. And I thought this is what we fought World War II to prevent ever happening in our societies. And yet here it is. And it's happening because no one's standing up and doing anything about it. And that's why I've basically done the show today, folks, because we really are running out of time. We need to get some sort of a global groundswell happening and start meeting in parks, start doing something, start getting information out to people, and start standing up and addressing these situations and not taking no for an answer. Go to your local council meetings, take hundreds of people with you and bring these issues up. And don't let them back away from the answers. Tell them that you're there to get answers, and if they don't have any answers, that's fine. You'll be back for the meeting next week, and they'd better have the answers then. Tell them that you expect them, as your representatives, to act on this issue. Should they fail to do so, you'll bring more people to the meeting next time. But don't take no for an answer, and don't take it lying down, folks. The time for action is now. And again, by doing this, you, of course, can't expect your local members or your local councillors or your local senators to actually be able to do anything. But what it will do is it will help to raise public awareness. It will help put the issue firmly on the table. And that's what needs to happen. Because once enough people know about it, once enough people can get it into their heads that these things in the sky are not contrails, then the question has to be, what are these things? What are they spraying? What are they doing? Why is all this aluminium content being found in the food? And who is responsible for this? I mean, sure, if global warming was a reality and they needed to try geoengineering, sure. If they think it'll work, not a problem. But you don't go spraying hundreds of tons of aluminium upon the population without telling them that you're doing so, because it's an extremely toxic metal. And this is what's happening. Scientific readings on the soil show that this is what's happening. And this has been going on since at least the mid-90s, and God knows how long before. So this is a common issue that affects everybody, and that's why I've dedicated most of today's show to this issue.